right, what is up, LA, Orange County, Chargers fans? It is lunchtime with LAFB live. Daniel Wade, Locked On Chargers, obviously also with the LA Football Network, was at camp today, so I'm excited to get into it and get some observations. What's up, bro? How you doing?
What's up, man? Excited. Just got done with my first day of training camp out there. It was a lot of fun. Happy to be here.
Love it. Yeah, we'll let people trickle in here before we get into it. But how was the drive up? Because you probably had to leave nice and early for that 9 o'clock start time, huh?
Yeah, left super early, then realized I didn't have any cash on me because after our SoFi Field experience, the cash-free experience, I didn't even think about it, and then I needed to go get cash for parking. So I ended up getting there right in time to start seeing stuff actually go down on the field. So it was good. No traffic, and I'll knock on wood because I stopped to drive home.
I'm curious how. Yeah, you'll probably hit on the way. Well, it's noon. You're okay. So for me from Pasadena at that time, it took me about an hour and a half. What did it take you from San Diego?
Yeah, about an hour and a half.
Okay, that's crazy. My
Yeah, I think it said like an hour and 27 minutes, something like that.
Okay, lucky you. Yeah, mine was literally, I think, from my door to Jack Hammett is like 33 miles, and it took me like an hour and a half every day last week.
Oh yeah, definitely covered some more ground for sure.
Yeah, that's good. I guess everyone's going the other way or something. So, well, good, man. Glad you're able to make it. Glad you're representing both us and your podcast, Locked On Chargers. So happy to get into it. First, I got to ask you this because there was some confusion, and this happened with the Rams camp on Saturday also, but they figured it out before before practice started. So the Chargers come out in pads. Everyone's psyched, amped. We're seeing some hitting drills, which we'll get into because they still did it. But then halfway through camp, basically shed the shells, go back down to helmets. What can you tell us that happened?
So at first I didn't know what was happening. I mean, I had assumed day one padded practices. We're gonna kind of slowly work them into it. Maybe we'll go half the practice with it, half the practice without it. And I just saw everyone start taking off shoulder pads, and then I ended up seeing Jeff Miller, LA Times, ended up reporting that the Chargers were not supposed to start padded practice today. Brandon Staley apologized, said the NFL could dock them one day of padded practices because it is their 6th day of camp, and I guess you're not supposed to have pads on day 6. So that was a little weird, but I'm glad I got to be there to see the mistake for sure. I mean, I'm glad I got to see those dudes going out there in pads. There was definitely a different energy out there today. I mean, when the pads come on, the hits start going down. Derwin James had a big hit today on Justin Jackson along the sideline, and Justin Jackson gave him a little, hey, I still got a first down, gesture after that. But the pads were on, and yeah, definitely seemed like a mistake happened. And then later you find out they were not supposed to have those pads on. So still glad I got to be there.
Yeah, we got to sneak some extra work in, and once the pads go on, the dogs come out, and it gets the juices flowing. It's real football again finally. So. Staley, I think, commented afterwards too that their plan anyway, regardless, is to do like 2 padded practices and 1 with just helmets. So if they get docked one, I don't think it'll really ruin their schedule anyway, which is good to hear if that's the plan. And we trust Staley and his planned out short practices anyway. So, but they had the pads on early. Let's talk about Rashawn Slater, the fan favorite, 13th overall pick rookie. Finally got to see him go up against Joey Bosa, Kyle Frackrell. A bunch of different guys on the edge, Uchenna on one-on-one drills. How did he look in your eyes, Dan?
I mean, I was definitely looking at Rashawn Slater, one of the guys I was most excited to see get the pads on, and I mean, he looked great. I mean, the one-on-ones, he didn't lose a one-on-one when they were doing that against the defensive line. When he was out there on 11 on 11, there's a couple, maybe it could have gone either way, but it's hard to be more impressed today than I was with Rashawn Slater. I mean, he was definitely a little smaller than I imagined, right? I mean, seeing him staying next to guys like Trey Pipkins and guys like that who were like 6'6", 6'7", was a little shocking at first. But, I mean, once they got out there, man, I mean, you definitely see why he was regarded as one of the best tackles in this draft class. I definitely feel a lot better about him starting now after seeing him go up against Joey Bosa, looking good against Uchenna Nwosu. All these guys we know are good for the Chargers. He was out there, he belonged, and he excelled. I mean, I don't think you could have asked for much more from Rashawn Slater on the first day in pads. I mean, if he's a rookie, he definitely didn't look like it today.
That's great to hear. And yeah, you mentioned the size, and especially next to Matt Filer, who is way bigger than I ever anticipated. When I saw him last week, I was like, holy shit, this guy's the biggest lineman of them all. But when you talk about Slater looking good, and you were at a Senior Bowl also this year, so you were able to see one-on-one, or you were there more for the game. But I mean, you've obviously watched a lot of tape and stuff. So for those fans that weren't at camp today, what can you say like stood out that you saw Slater do? Like, was it his fluidity? Was it how he got his hands on guys? Because a lot of people, that if they're not there, they're like, oh, Slater looked good in one-on-ones, but like, what does that mean? 'Cause you're not actually rushing like a quarterback per se. So I guess if you can break it down visually for the guys not there, for the people not there.
Yeah, I mean, and for offensive linemen, I mean, there's not very many more technical positions, right? I mean, the footwork is huge, the handwork is huge, the balance, the speed, the lateral quickness. And I think for me today, it was the lateral quickness, right? Squaring everybody up. Couple of times, even when he got a little off balance, he still had the hand strength, still had the strength to keep his defender at bay. And like the big thing is just not moving backwards. I mean, the dude wasn't going backwards at all today at training camp, no matter who he was going up against. So to see those, that kind of technician in person, I mean, the hand placement was great. The lateral quickness was great. The balance was really, really good. I mean, pretty much all the trademark things you're looking for in offensive lineman, staying in front of people, getting your hands on them, and most importantly, not getting driven back, right, which is something that we've seen from the Chargers offensive line, just pockets collapsing on top of Justin Herbert or Phillip Rivers. Rashawn Slater wasn't going backwards today. I mean, he was keeping everybody out, and he just looked really good. I mean, in one-on-ones, to have that kind of technique already and just to not look overmatched at all. There wasn't a single point where I was like, okay, this dude looks like a rookie. I mean, handled every assignment I saw from him extremely well, and it really showed up in the one-on-ones and when the little bit of practice we got to see 11 on 11 with pads on.
Yeah, well, it's great. It's good to hear, and the lateral quickness and stuff is something that I know that excited a lot of teams coming into the draft. So you tweeted a lot about it. It was a good rookie day all around for this Chargers team. Josh Palmer, who I've loved every day I was there last week, just his footwork. I mean, he's the only one I think that can come close at this point to the route running ability of Keenan Allen, and Keenan Allen's still, the best at that. But Josh Palmer, with his footwork and his speed, his fluidity with his hips, looks pretty damn close. So what can you say about Palmer and his day, and any, we'll just stick with receivers, I guess, any of the other receivers, any takeaways you saw from that group?
Yeah, I mean, I thought that Josh Palmer looked great today. I mean, I posted a video on my Twitter at Dan Talk Sports of him going up against Asante Samuel Jr. I was excited when I saw them lining up across from each other as the second and third round picks this year. Josh Palmer definitely got away with a little push off, right, at a little separation, extra separation on the route. But I thought Josh Palmer looked good. Caught another breakaway touchdown where you really saw that separation for him in the deep part of the field. That was really impressive. Basically walked in for a touchdown. And I think the physicality from him today was something that really stood out, right? Once you get the pads on, I mean, he's a huge dude. I joked that they took the pads off and one guy still looked like he had pads on, and it was Josh Palmer. So I think for a receiver of his physical stature, you're going to start seeing more of that, right? As the camps keep going, as the pads are on, as things start to heat up. His separation, his physicality at the top of routes, I loved that today. I thought he had a really good practice. Your boy Austin Prohl had a pretty good practice. There's one, I mean, maybe considered a drop for him, but I thought he looked crisp. He was running good routes out there, got a lot of return duties there. Jalen Guyton ended up beating Asante Samuel Jr. right on his hip pocket, really, on one-on-ones. There was some definite standout moments from the receivers today, but, I mean, it's hard to say anyone as a receiver had a better day than Josh Palmer.
Love it. And I just want to note real quick, T. Billy, Tyron Johnson did not practice, for those that did not know. Do you have any idea why? I didn't hear that. Was it just limiting reps, or did you hear anything?
Yeah, tweaked foot on Saturday at practice, supposedly a tweaked foot. But, I mean, he's fighting with Josh Palmer right now for that wide receiver 3 spot, right? So definitely some snaps up for grabs there. Definitely a day where Josh Palmer took advantage of it in that battle for sure.
And that's what you want to see with training camp, is you want to see the battles. You want to see who takes advantage of their opportunity when the opportunity presents itself. So it's good to hear Josh Palmer did that. He was a guy that I had my dynasty rookie draft just a couple days ago, and I made sure to nab Josh Palmer in that draft, because I just think he's going to have a big year from a rookie standpoint. So excited to hear he's doing good, and just great hands. I don't think he has a single drop all training camp yet, and the separation ability, like you mentioned, and us receivers, we always got to get a little push off in there. It's just natural what we got to do to get that little extra edge.
Of course,
so
you're not an offensive guy. Offensive
exactly.
guys always want to get that.
Exactly. Come on, it's just hand fighting.
I
just call it
played
hand
linebacker.
fighting. Okay, yeah, there you go. Yeah, you play linebacker. We got Steven played offensive line. I was a receiver. So yeah, we just call them hand checks, hand fighting. It's not push off. It's what it is.
Yeah, I mean, hey, especially when you think like that, it's easy to get away from people when you're that stacked up top for sure.
Yeah, that helps definitely. So you mentioned Austin Proehl. Got to bring him up. I was going to end with him, but since you brought him up, guy that I've said basically since day 2, I'm like, this guy's making the roster unless something happens based on just his special team ability. Because I think he was the slam dunk at this point, punt return and kick return guy. They seem to be putting him out there every time, getting the most reps. But I think he has better ability as a receiver than most give him credit for. Obviously, they don't need him to do much. He'll be wide receiver 6 probably on this roster. But if needed, he can be that slot out route guy, bubble screen guy that can get you a couple yards here and there if you need it. He's sure-handed. So I think you said he had a red zone touchdown too, I believe, correct?
Yes, he did. Yeah, from Chase Daniel, I believe.
There you go. So that's what I like to see.
Yeah.
So. And he was still the unquestioned return guy today?
Yeah, I mean, and he just, even the way he caught like kickoffs and stuff, like catching him in stride on the run, getting a running start, and not being afraid that he's going to muff it or anything like that. As you said, you're a former return man yourself. That's not easy to do. Catching punts is really tough. Even kickoffs can be tough at times, depending on where they end up kicking it. So, looked super comfortable. I mean, if I were KJ Hill right now, I would be a little bit scared, I think, just because that is the kind of guy he is, right? I mean, good route runner, probably going to be working mostly from the slot if he's on the field as a receiver. KJ Hill was the number 1 punt returner last year. Didn't do anything to really cement himself as the undoubted guy going forward. I know Brandon Staley's mentioned Proehl by name, but we've talked about it on Locked On Chargers. Like, at first I was saying like, hey, he's going to have to be like one of the best returners ever to get a spot just because of that with how deep this wide receiver room is. But when you're making plays, on both, like, it's a numbers game, right? We know Josh Palmer, Tyron Johnson, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, those guys are safe. Jalen Guyton had a pretty big role last year, led the receivers in snaps last year. You would think he would have a good shot to make it, but you're going to start running out of numbers eventually, and Austin Proehl is going to make that a really, really tough decision if he can keep it up, because you're right. How do you cut your starting kick returner and starting punt returner, right, if he's the guy getting all the snaps? So just the fact that they're putting him out there as much as they are right now is something I think should be definitely noted. You were definitely the first one on that bandwagon for sure, the Austin Proehl, former XFL guy bandwagon, and it's coming to fruition so far. It's going to make it really, really tough when some of these training camp cuts start to come. Yeah.
The last thing I'll ask you about the receivers, because a guy that we've all circled is Joe Reed, to see what his role is going to be, and he could be that odd man out also, because you mentioned the 4 that are locks into that 5 and 6 spot, and right now I think Proehl's leading because of his special teams. But is it Guyton? Is it Reed? Is it KJ Hill? Is it Jason Moore? They're just stacked there. So did Joe Reed do anything today to show out at all, or was he just another guy kind of there?
Yeah, he had one play. He ran a nice route on one-on-ones, made a reception. Also had one where it wasn't a great route, and it was broken up by Ryan Smith, who ended up actually getting hurt on the play. The special teams ace they kind of brought in. Not a guy known for his coverage ability, but definitely a capable defender. But he had a pass broken up by Ryan Smith. Didn't do anything that would wow you. And I think for Joe Reed, it's going to be about stacking up those wow plays, right? And he'll have a shot in preseason games and things like that. But there were guys that wowed out there today, and he wasn't one of them. And that's just the matter-of-fact part of it. He just didn't do anything today where I had to post about him, right? I didn't have any tweets about him, which probably isn't a great time. So, definitely not over for Joe Reed, but at a certain point, he's going to have to start, stacking together successes, stacking together big plays, and start showing the reason why they need to keep him on this team, because If they don't need to keep him on this team, he's not doing, he's not punt returning. Maybe he does something in kick returning today. Didn't really see anything crazy out of him. It's going to be really tough for him. So he's going to have to get going pretty quickly, I would say.
Yeah, and we've said a lot on our show. I'm sure you guys have talked about it on Locked On Chargers. Is these former draft picks, Jay Reed, Kid Hill, Joshua Kelly, guys like that. They're from the former regime, so none of them are. If they're fringe players, they don't get that extra boost because they were a last year draft pick. This is a new coaching staff. That's the evaluation is a level playing field, and so yeah, you said it, until he starts stacking some plays, he might be the odd man out. Even though the last coaching class always spoke highly of him, even though they, benched him the last half of the season. But that's another story. We're past that. So, well, Dan, let's move it to the defense. Talking to Dan Wade of Locked On Chargers, LAFB Network. This is Lunchtime with LAFB. Defense, Asante Samuel. A lot of people have been worried that he's been running behind Brandon Faison. I have not been concerned. I think that's better for the team because it just shows you the depth they have. It shows they can develop him a little slowly. Brandon Staley talked about him a little bit in the beginning of his press conference today, just saying they're throwing a ton at him. They want him to be able to do basically every position in that defensive backfield. And so they're throwing a ton at him for him to learn. And we're just starting the second week of camp. So for fans out there that are worried that he's mainly with the twos, that's not because of his ability or because he's learning slow. They're just giving him a lot to digest. And Brandon Faison's a more of a veteran that fits the physical profile that Staley likes. So, but I heard today he had a great day. You tweeted about him a couple times, other than the hand fighting with Josh Palmer. I heard he played pretty well, ran with one. So what was your assessment of Asante Samuel today?
I think it was his first big day out there today. I mean, I definitely wasn't concerned about it, but of course, when you have a guy who's picked in the second round, a guy who, Chargers fans are pretty unequivocally excited about, you want.
We'll get him back. We'll get him back. He's coming to us live from his car. He's not driving, luckily. Got safety first, parked over, but I'm sure the service just isn't great. So we will get him back in here as soon as we can to finish that. But yeah, from everything I heard from other beat reporters and from just Dan being there, and we were talking throughout practice, I heard Asante Samuel looked, more comfortable today. Was not even that he's looked bad even last week. He didn't look bad at all. He was just running with the twos. So that was kind of the concern, is well, I thought this was our starting corner outside of Mike Davis. But like I said, when you're throwing so much at it and getting him to, learn so much stuff, you need time to develop that. You're not only you learning a whole new system, you're making the jump from college to the pros. I mean, that's a huge jump, especially for a corner. It's got to cover these big receivers that this Chargers teams have with speed and size. So today, though, ran a lot more with the ones in 7-on-7, in 11s, in the red zone there. So hopefully we can get Dan back and he can touch on more of how that went. But from what I heard, it was a solid day for him. And I think there's a lot to be excited about for this Chargers secondary. Mark Webb, another guy that I think he had another interception from what I heard. Is really taking this offense this defensive scheme and learning it very quickly, which is something we knew coming out of the class when he was taken in the 7th. Not a lot of people knew him, but he wasn't the most physically gifted safety, but he was very cerebral, very smart, did everything with a purpose. And that's guys that Brandon Staley likes. Very versatile. He's extremely versatile, can play a little nickel if need be, can play back, can play in the box if he puts on a little bit more weight as well. So Mark Webb, another guy that's just continually to grow. And Staley talked about him in his press conference too, about how impressed he's been with the reps he's been given and the opportunity he's been given, and he's taken advantage of them and used his size to his advantage. So he's another guy. I think there's a lot of things to be excited about, even though he's not needed to be, he's not needed to be the starter. He's not needed to be the starter. They'll just have him, be a special teams role and then utilize him in that versatility when they can. So I think we got Dan back. Can you hear me?
I hope so. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
I guess sometimes you don't get the best reception in gas station parking lots. I guess I should have picked a different gas station. No offense to Chevron.
You already had a Chevron?
I'm just out of Chevron, across the street from a 76. Maybe I should have went over there. I'm starting to down myself a little bit,
It must have been the
Chevron.
Chevron
Samuel Jr. I would have been really upset if I didn't get to talk about him because he looked really good today. I mean, one-on-ones, even the pass that was completed against him. He was right in Jalen Guyton's hip pocket. I mean, and once 11 on 11s came, had a pick. Probably, people said pick six. I mean, didn't look like many people were running full speed after him, but had another play where he had just one of those plays where you see it all kind of come together and all the things that you were looking forward to. The click and close speed on a guy, just almost baiting the quarterback into a throw just to get in front of it. Ended up dropping it. It was nice to see him corral one off of Justin Herbert, no less. But I think he's another guy where I think he likes playing in pads. You know what I mean? Like, he's a dog. He wants to get his hands on people. He wants to be physical, even though he's an undersized dude. I came away super impressed. I wasn't worried. Like you said, I mean, he doesn't need to be the starter necessarily, even though I think he'll end up being the starter. And, I mean, starter is such a relative term with this team because so many sub packages are either starting money or either starting star. Where do you line up in dime packages? Like, there's going to be ways for them to get him on the field. Today, he just showed exactly why they spent a second-round pick on him. I mean, he looked like a dog out there. His competitiveness was through the roof. I mean, you can tell he's pissed off, right? I mean, if something doesn't go right, if he doesn't get to a ball in time, he drops an interception, and he was definitely beating himself up about that interception for a couple of minutes. So we were all kind of waiting for that day. That was going to be kind of the Asante Samuel Jr. breakout day. Today seemed like it was it. I mean, the dude was everywhere. He looked good. He looked like he was playing physical. And I loved what I saw from him today. It was really exciting to see the second-round pick in action.
Well, there you go, Bull fam. So rest easy. Asante Samuel Jr. is coming along just nicely like we thought he would. But that is great to hear. So a guy that, they just want to move all over the place and learn, an expansive system, expansive schemes. So is he towards the end of practice, Dan, when they were doing 11 on 11s, was he primarily with the ones now, or was it a rotation between him and Faison, or how are they kind of repping that?
It was definitely a rotation. He wasn't out there at the very beginning of it, but he was also out there with the second team too. So he was getting starter and second team reps, which is great. I mean, get him as many reps as possible. The pick was off Justin Herbert, though. The throw he, was close to breaking up one-on-ones was from Herbert. I mean, just a lot of really good plays against, some of the Chargers' best receivers out there. So definitely was mixed into the ones a little bit more today, at least from what I've seen from the other training camp practices. And he looked like he fit in nicely, right? Didn't really see him get beat on any big plays or anything like that, even though there were a lot of touchdowns scored today at training camp. So he was not the victim of those touchdowns. He was out there making plays, and I'm excited to see what he does going forward. I'm excited to get back out there and watch him again because he definitely looked like the truth today.
Love it. Things you love to hear. So sticking with the defense and the rookies, Mark Webb. I brought him up briefly while you were reconnecting. So I just talked about how, you tweeted a few about him, how he had a pretty solid practice from what it sounds like. And Staley talked about how he's, progressing nicely. And another thing they liked about him was his versatility. So what did you see from Webb, and, how was his rotation looking? Just talk to us about Mark.
Yeah, I mean, it was a lot of time spent with the second and third teams for sure, once it was 11 on 11. But did end up picking off a pass in that session. He was playing deep. They went for a deep ball over the middle, Chase Daniel, and he ended up picking it off, running with it. That looked on.
I think we're Dan's service at that Chevron is not working out for us.
About him, I mean, oh yeah, I mean, he looked good for sure. I mean, one-on-one with Jared Cook, ended up breaking up a pass. And, I mean, I'm more impressed with him. He's a guy I was definitely concerned about. I mean, coming in as a seventh-round pick, knowing that with the depth at safety right now, he might have to get on the field. And I'm a little less concerned after today watching him out there. I'd say the same thing about Alohi Gilman. I mean, Alohi Gilman was not someone I was very high on coming into the season. More concerned about, more than anything, just because we hadn't really seen him on the field. He was a special teams player that didn't really sniff the field defensively last year. The Chargers went out and signed Jaleel Adai and had him on the field instead of Alohi Gilman, and he was a rookie, right? I mean, players can get better. He was a playmaker at Notre Dame. They talked about Ronaldo Hill, him being on the back end of the defense, especially in dime packages. He's like the safety out there. When Chris Harris Jr. is up near the line of scrimmage, and when Derwin James is playing that star role for them or the money role. So I was impressed by both those guys today, but Mark Webb in coverage, right, a place that you said you probably improve a lot because that was one of the main concerns from him. The instincts were on the show today. The physicality with the pads was, out there. I mean, I came away really impressed with Mark Webb today. It was a big day for the rookies, and Mark Webb is a 7th-round pick, breaking up passes from Jared Cook, intercepting Chase Daniel, who still had a pretty good day and had a few touchdowns as well. It's hard to ask for much more than that from a rookie. I mean, there's a couple plays in 11 on 11. Hard to tell if he was a little out of place maybe, but didn't get beat on any really big plays and definitely had a much more positive day than a negative day. I was impressed by him and Alohi Gilman out there on the back end, which makes me feel a lot better with the depth at safety because behind Derwin James and Nazir Adderley, there's not a lot of experience there.
Yeah, it was a huge concern after the draft and after free agency when they didn't add anyone else, and they waited till the 7th to take Mark Webb. But they seemed to get the guy they wanted, and I've said it many times, and it's probably getting old, but to me, that's the Jordan Fuller pick. Like, he just reminds me of Jordan Fuller from the Rams, and I think he's going to continue to develop and define that role. Not saying he's going to start, but he will have a place on this team, not just on special teams. But it's good to hear about Alohi Gilman too, because I know it's a guy that really I feel like in general, not necessarily maybe Charter fans, but for sure, a lot myself, it's a guy I kind of just, I don't want to say brush aside, but it's not a guy I really think about as a true threat to this safety rotation. So it's good to hear that he's developing also. And I saw a little bit of that last week, but today being in pads a little bit, you're able to see it better. So was it typically, I'm trying to remember what it was last week. Were they lined up together, Webb and Alohi, when they were going with the 2s and 3s? Or were they playing each other's position, rotating out?
Alohi Gilman was out there a lot today with the 1s. I mean, in the side packages, 3rd and longs, that's when he ended up making his big play. He was out there with the 1s. He did stay out there, though, and worked with Mark Webb. Both of them were playing safety on the back end at one point. But I know Ronaldo Hill talked about Alohi Gilman, just the calmness he's brought to the back end, which if you watch the kind of frenetic player that he was at Notre Dame, I don't think calm is a word that you would associate him with much, right? But the other thing that we know Brandon Staley really cares about is the communication aspect of it, and they've been raving about his communication on the back end there. And I think for him, especially with this coaching staff, that's a great way to ingratiate yourself with them, right? Making sure everybody's lined up in the right spot, making sure you're always in the right spot, and being able to kind of relay the plays to people when you need to. And it seems like he's doing a good job of that. And I mean, I'm not going to lie, I haven't been high on Alohi Gilman. I was scared about Mark Webb. This organization has shown a ton of faith in Brandon Staley by giving him a couple of backup safeties who are 6th and 7th round picks, right? And not feeling like they need to push the envelope anymore to bring in extra help. And that's one of the things I talked about is we'll know how comfortable this coaching staff is with these safeties at the end of camp if they decide to bring in another veteran, right? Because that's always still on the table. They could bring in someone who's more experienced. I wouldn't be opposed to it either way, even if they have good camps. But if the Chargers go into the season with those 2 dudes behind Derwin James and Nazir Adderley with their lengthy injury history over the last couple of seasons, you'll know they have a lot of faith in those guys. And right now it's paying dividends because both those guys had another really good training camp practice today, seem to be getting more comfortable, which is crazy for Mark Webb. I mean, his instincts were on show, his physicality. The coverage is coming along now. I mean, that's all pretty exciting stuff, and you might not be able to see it on the field week 1, but for 2 guys who were developing players, I thought it was a huge stride, for those dudes. And the Chargers organization trusting Brandon Staley seems like it's paying off at this point. They're trusting him to get the most out of these dudes, and both of them seem like they're playing pretty well against a pretty stacked offense.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's the big thing is the trust they have in this coaching staff and allowing them to say, hey, these are the players that fit what I want to do, and then we can mold them into how we see fit. And like we talked about last week, Chris Harris Jr. is playing on the back end on a few plays, depending on what package they do. We'll see Asante Samuel back there. So 4 safeties on the roster doesn't necessarily only mean those 4 players playing safety. And I've said that ad nauseum, I feel like, but that's just going to be something to keep watching for as camp continues.
Defensive backs, according to Brandon Staley, right? I mean, he won't even let you call in the corner as safety anyways.
Exactly. So yeah, you don't have 6 corners and 4 safeties. You have 10 DBs. And that's how they're going to roll things. So that's what people need to look at when they see depth, is just the total number of DBs. Last question for the defense, and then I got one final question for you, Dan, and then if you have anything to wrap up, and then we'll conclude this live. So appreciate you pausing your drive home to jump on with us and give your takeaways. You have a great article coming up on the LAFB Network here soon too about Justin Herbert. We'll drop a little teaser there for those watching, so make sure to check that out later today. But one guy that's, I think, shined in the first week of camp was Kaiser White, who coming into camp, it was pretty unanimous that it was going to be Kenneth Murray and Drew Tranquill, your starting backers. And, you know, I've said many times that there's going to be a rotation. The way Stanley Rhodes things, when he was with the Rams, they had a 3 to 4 man rotation all year long. Like, there were injuries that happened, but even when all guys were healthy, it wasn't just like Micah Kaiser and Kenny Young. Troy Reader got on the field in certain situations. So I was pretty confident we'd see Kaiser White and maybe some other backers out there as well. But I wasn't thinking Kaiser White would be like the unquestioned starter like we saw last week in camp. Was that what you saw today? Was Kaiser White out there a lot? Did we see more Drew Tranquill? How did the inside backers look?
Yeah, I mean, I thought they looked good. I mean, I won't lie, the scrimmage part of it was on the far side of the field, so a lot of those scrums, you don't really know who's coming out positively, right? And for the running backs, you can't fully tackle them. So even though a guy might break out of the pile and start running like
yeah. We'll wait, guys. It'll catch up.
Eckler, he was definitely out there with the ones today. Drew Tranquill got in there with the ones as well. I mean, both those guys, I mean, I definitely potentially made the mistake of kind of writing him off as a great depth piece, maybe a guy who gets in certain packages because you want to get him on the field. Maybe it isn't, maybe it isn't such a foregone conclusion that it's Kenneth Murray and that it's Drew Tranquill. But what I will say, though, is maybe Drew Tranquill and Kazir White are a better fit for the Chargers on third down if they're trying to keep two linebackers out there than Drew Tranquill and Kenneth Murray are, right? So maybe it's those two guys that are getting on the field at the same time. Kenneth Murray obviously is a great blitzer and things like that, and we're definitely going to hopefully see more of that this year. But I do think it will be a rotation. I do think he'll use those guys in certain situations. And although Kazir White didn't have any super memorable plays today, neither did Drew Tranquill, I still think that it's one of those positions where as the padded practices keep going on, we'll get a little bit better of an idea because we only had a little taste of it today. But I don't think it's understating it to say that Kazir White right now will have a role on this defense. I'm not ready to say he's the undoubted starter because I like Drew Tranquill a lot. But at the same time, so far he's proven that you're going to have to get him on the field, right? And your play is going to dictate a lot of that, especially how you do in certain situations. I felt last year Kazir White, if you looked at the passer rating he allowed last year, it's awful. Like I think it was like 110 or something like that. But like there is so many, like that doesn't show the distance between you and the receiver, right? That doesn't show how close you potentially were to getting a pick and then it just didn't go your way or whatever the case was. He was about a step away from making a lot of plays this year, and I think that the linebackers will improve in coverage just being in Brandon Staley's defense and him knowing what their flaws are and things like that. But I do think he's another player that is just showing right now that he should be on the field, and it's going to be hard to keep him off. And he does have that, former safety play at West Virginia. He came out as a safety. They ended up transitioning him to linebacker, so he does move well on the back end. As Brandon Staley put it, he moves like a DB, hits like a linebacker. I'm not willing to go that far. I don't think he's a true DB, but I do think he gives you some better flexibility, and we know that Brandon Staley has talked about, I need linebackers who can run and cover, right? And even though Kenneth Murray might be able to do that in a very scaled-down degree if you're giving him running backs in the flats and things like that, we know Kenneth Murray's at his best when he's heading towards the line of scrimmage, when he's getting downhill and all those things. Kazir White has the potential to be more than that, right? He has the potential to be better in coverage and to help the Chargers that way because he is super athletic. And I think that now that the injuries seem to be in the rearview mirror because the Chargers were limiting his snaps the last couple of seasons because of the injury to his knee that hadn't fully come back yet. It was a really weird situation. Not a lot came out about it. But they had him playing, strong side, outside linebacker at times, right? Holding the edge and things like that. That's not his strength, really, right? And that's kind of the role they had him in last year. And until the injury, obviously Drew Tranquill, things changed. But that's kind of the role they had him in when everybody was healthy before. So I don't think that really suited him. I think now what he's looking like so far in practice, I mean, it seems like he fits the defense pretty well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, that 110 rating also doesn't take into account when Gus Bradley has you cover Tyreek Hill, which, as linebackers, usually not the smartest thing to do. So that, I don't think we'll see that this year.
Sure. I mean, he got mossed. I think he got mossed by Gronk in the Tampa Bay game. There was one where I was just like, God, poor Kazir White. Poor Kazir White. Never be put in this situation right now.
Come on, guys. Yeah, come on. Especially when you got Mike Davis, who's like a 7-foot corner. Like, come on, what are you doing? Cool. Well, I will.
7 feet tall.
Yeah, exactly. It's like dog years, right? It's like dog years in terms of that. Okay, before I ask my final question, because I want to wrap up with some Justin Herbert talk. Is there anything else you want to touch on that you saw, or did we hit kind of all the points?
I think we pretty much got it. I mean, big day for the rookies for sure. Definitely heated up a little bit with pads. I mean, the one thing that's always hard to tell at training camp is the big plays that happen. Would it have been a sack or would it not have been a sack? And I think there was a couple more of those today. But Rashawn Slater, Asante Samuel Jr., Josh Palmer, Mark Webb, those were the guys. I mean, I was obviously looking at those guys, especially because they're rookies, and it's your first chance to see them. But those were my MVPs from practice today, hands down. I thought all those guys played well. So great to see a big day from the rookies.
Love it. Yeah. It was a tray passed hors d'oeuvres on a Monday as we got a half padded practice, and hopefully we'll get the main course later in the week. So final thing to talk about here, Dan. Justin Herbert obviously is the star of this team, the star of this city. When it comes to Chargers, at least, but he's up there even with some of the Ram stars, is like just the favorite in this town now because of what he did. And I don't want this to get misconstrued. So for those listening, I don't want this to come out wrong because he's Justin Herbert. He's looked very good, but I think he's gotten a pass a little bit. Everyone just is enamored with what he did last year, with who he is. And there's been times, at least last week, where he wasn't as crisp as I would have liked to see. It didn't look bad, so I don't want anyone jumping down my throat saying like, oh, you're accusing Herbert of not looking good. But, he'd hit that 65-plus yard bomb to T. Billy, but then, he'd miss some 5-yard out routes, overthrowing Justin Jackson, making him stretch for it. It turned into a drop pass, but in reality, it was kind of a bad pass by Justin Herbert. A few ones where if he would have just in his drop back planted his feet, but instead decided to do a jump pass and trust his arm strength and, overthrew his receiver again. So not bad, just a little less crisp. But again, it's week 1. How did Justin look today? Did he look a little bit more crisp? Were there still some of those, I don't want to call them concerns, but some of those issues, if you will, on Monday?
I mean, he did have 2 interceptions, right? So that's obviously not something you want to see. I mean, he had one, I believe, to Mark Webb, and the other one it was a Lodi Gilman and Asante Samuel Jr., I believe, that ended up picking him off. The passes, I mean, it looked like he was trying to squeeze them in, maybe trusting that arm strength a little bit too much. As far as just the overthrows and just bad mechanics type of throws and stuff like that, I didn't see a lot of it. I mean, the one-on-ones, he looked crisp. The balls are right there. The timing was right. A lot of that stuff looked good, but that's a lot easier to do when there's nobody in your face, right? Another thing we always have to, consider is just the fact that it is a new offense, right? He is learning a brand new offense, and for the first time in this new offense, he has 300-pound dudes that are trying to get to him, right? Even though they can't actually hurt him or anything in training camp, they're not going to let him touch Justin Herbert, but still, I mean, you don't want to see the interceptions. Definitely a couple of forced throws, but besides the forced throws, I honestly thought he looked really good. It's easy to say, or kind of hard to say. He had a great practice with the 2 interceptions, but I mean, it's hard to say you have a good practice if you have 2 interceptions. But at the same time, I didn't see a lot of this, just those easy throws that were just being blatantly missed, because there were some of those moments last year when he was a rookie. I mean, there were just missed throws, right? Overthrows, just leading a receiver too much and just forcing the ball into some bad situations. Plays today, but overall, I mean, I thought he looked pretty good. I mean, the good passes were really good, and there was just like a handful that I'm sure he wishes he could have back.
Cool. Yeah, no, that's good to hear. Obviously, he's got the wow factor every day and makes those wow throws that you get excited about. And then, there were some little things. That was the kind of if I was being way overly critical, which is that's what we do, and we got to talk about something. If I'm being way overly critical, like some of the things I wanted to see with his mechanics were, not always trusting his arm strength. Like, no need to do jump passes. Just set your feet sometimes and not get too crazy trying to get the ball out there too quick. So, but glad to hear he had another great day. Obviously made some good passes. So, and I guess with that, that's Dan's out of here anyway. The service has dropped again. It's all good because we were going to wrap up anyway. So if I get him on, I'll say goodbye to him. But I thank you all guys for tuning in. Little LAFB lunchtime recap of Chargers Day 5 training camp. Dan Wade was live there with us, live tweeting. So if you wanted some updates there, just roll back to his Twitter feed at Dan Talk Sports, and you can update that, or just go to the LAFB Network Twitter feed. We'll have that, but we broke it all down right here. So if you came in late, just watch the replay. And then we got some articles going up later on LAFBnetwork.com as well, breaking it all down. As I mentioned in tease, Dan has a great Justin Herbert MVP article going up here in the next few hours. So we'll get that out to you. So thank you all for tuning in. If any Rams fans snuck in here, or if any of you just want to see behind enemy lines, Ryan Anderson, our Rams beat writer, will be at Rams camp later tonight, and then he's going to jump on with me afterwards to break down what went on at Day 5 of Rams camp. So, with that being said, I'm Ryan Dyrud. This is LAFB Live Lunchtime with LAFB. Appreciate you all for tuning in. We'll have updates and live videos all week, all training camp long, all season long. So make sure to subscribe to the LAFB Network YouTube channel if you've not already. Follow us on Twitter or Facebook. You can view those all there as well. So big thanks to listening. Big thanks to Dan Wade for his contribution, for his coverage at camp, and for also jumping on live with me right now. Hope you guys all have a fantastic rest of your day, and we'll check in with you again this evening and then tomorrow for some more Chargers updates.